Chapter 5. The Problem of Personal Identity. Learning Objectives. 5.1 Explain the philosophical questions that arise in the context of personal identity. 5.2 Analyze the advantages and limitations of the illusion theory of personal identity. 5.3 Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the body theory. 5.4 Summarize the challenges presented by the soul theory of personal identity. 5.5 Explain the strengths and weaknesses of Locke's memory theory. 5.6 Understand the key features of the narrative conception of personal identity. 5.7 Recognize the relationship of personal identity with other philosophical topics. What is the problem? 5.1 Explain the philosophical questions that arise in the context of personal identity. Our discussion of free will has made us aware that it is far from clear what kind of beings we truly are. Are we simply advanced animals, complicated machines, or godlike agents who shape the future? In this chapter, we will continue our exploration of the nature of the self by turning our attention to the problem of personal identity. In day-to-day conversation, we sometimes say that someone is not the same anymore. For example, we can imagine a married woman who files for divorce because she thinks that her husband is no longer the same person she married 10 years ago. In religious contexts, people are said to be reborn. The boxer Cassius Clay changed his name to Muhammad Ali when he converted to Islam. Middle-aged individuals sometimes report that none of their accomplishments have any meaning for the persons they have become. What are we to think about these transformations? Is it possible that we change who we are or that we lose our sense of self? We do change constantly. As time goes by, we grow from being a baby into an adult, and we subsequently turn into an older person. Not only do our bodies change, but our ideas, desires, and values undergo even more radical transformations. This permanent change leads to obvious questions. Do we always remain one and the same person, no matter how much we change? What kind of change can bring our existence to an end? Is our physical death necessarily the end of us? What happens to ourselves if we have Alzheimer's and we lose our memories? Are we still around, or have we gone out of existence with the last passing memory? These questions lead us to a central philosophical problem of personal identity. The problem of personal identity is not a single problem but rather a set of loosely connected questions that need to be distinguished from one another. One question in this set concerns the values that are most important to us. Consider the case of Marcel, who during his 20s was interested only in making money. However, later in life, Marcel changed his life radically. He lost all interest in making money and now spends all his time helping disabled children. In this case, it makes sense to ask whether Marcel is still the same person. If we answer no, we mean that Marcel's values have radically changed. He now cares about different kinds of things than he used to. But we do not mean that the young Marcel has ceased to exist. Marcel the person has changed, but Marcel the person did not go out of existence. A different type of question about personal identity focuses on how unified ourselves really are. Are we each one singular being, or is it possible that there is more than one person in me? Taking this question seriously does not have to mean that we have a personality disorder. Even in normal circumstances, it might be possible to detect different distinct elements in us that cannot be unified within one coherent personality. A third question about personal identity relates to persistence through time. What accounts for the fact that either person who exists right now am identical to a person in the past or in the future? The main questions surrounding the problem of personal identity are illustrated in the adjacent graphic. our discussion of personal identity, we will focus on the persistence question. What is required for the same person to persist from one time to another? Questions about persistence have attracted the most fruitful philosophical discussions in recent times. Moreover, the question about persistence is closely intertwined with our thoughts about death. Our discussion of the persistence questions will therefore prepare the ground for our analysis of death in the final chapter. Given that the problem of personal identity is broad and involves several different questions, our exploration of the persistence question cannot possibly answer everything we want to know about personal identity. However, our discussion will provide us with a good introduction to the philosophical puzzles that surround personal identity. As we begin to explore the persistence question, let us consider the pictures shown here. The pictures seem to represent different stages in the life of one person, but can we be sure that we are dealing with just one person here? Flo, can we eliminate the possibility that these pictures show us different persons? The persistence question asks under what circumstances a person who exists at one time, example, the African-American looking child that sang with the Jackson 5, is identical to a person who exists at another time, example, the Caucasian-looking adult who underwent extreme facial surgery. Can we specify what kind of changes a person can survive while remaining one numerical person? An alternative approach to the persistence question is to look at the beginning of life. When exactly did the person who I am right now begin to exist? Did I come into being when I was born? Or did I start to exist when I started to develop higher cognitive abilities as a toddler? Perhaps I started to exist at the time of conception? Different theories answer these questions in different ways. However, before we explore the various responses to the persistence question, we need to draw an important philosophical distinction. The use of the word same is ambiguous. When we speak of identical twins, we often say that they are the same, meaning that they look alike and exhibit no visual differences. In a similar fashion, we might say that my neighbor has the same car that I have, meaning that my neighbor and I own two versions of the same type of vehicle. When we use the word same in this way, we refer to qualitative identity. Two things are qualitatively identical if they look the same, that is, if they have the same properties. At times we use the word same with a different meaning. For instance, when I say that the kid across the street was seen riding the same bicycle that was stolen from my garage last week, I mean the very same bicycle that was stolen from my garage. This sense of the word same is called numerical identity. Something is numerically identical with something else only if both are one and the same thing. For example, the person who wrote the critique, if pure reason is numerically identical to the person who wrote the critique of practical reason, one and the same man, Immanuel Kant, wrote both books. The persistence question deals exclusively with numerical identity. When we wonder whether we persist through time, we are not interested in knowing whether we look the same at different times. We want to know instead whether we are numerically the same throughout different life stages. Suppose, for instance, that you have an accident and lose consciousness permanently but your body is still alive. Are you still around, or have you gone out of existence? Questions like these we will address when we explore the persistence question of personal identity. The following chart should provide a useful introduction to the various responses that have been developed to the persistence question. Illusion theory. There is no self that persists through time. We change from one moment to the next and turn constantly into new person. To think that we persist through time is an illusion. Body theory. We persist through time as long as we have the same numerical body. The principle here is same body, same person. Soul theory. We persist through time as long as we continue to have the same soul. In structure, the theory is very similar to the body theory. The principle is same soul, same person. Memory theory. We persist through time as long as we can remember at least some events from our past life. Stages. The principle here is, as long as we have overlapping memories, the same numerical person continues to exist. Narrative identity. According to the narrative identity view, different life stages are attributable to one person if they are incorporated into one story, narrative, of a life. Food for thought. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato, 427–347 BCE, is famous for comparing our inner selves, ourselves, to cities. Just like cities are multifaced and heterogeneous, so too are our inner selves. Plato suggested in this context that the essential project for all of us is to unify our inner selves. He writes, "A unified just person puts himself in order, is his own friend and binds together those inner parts, and from having been many things he becomes entirely one." Does Plato's idea that our inner selves need to be unified make sense to you? Food for thought. Stanley Tookie Williams grew up in a tough neighborhood in Los Angeles. In 1971, together with his friend Raymond Lee, he founded a gang that became known as the Crips. Tookie was a ferocious street fighter and a ruthless gang leader. In 1981, he was convicted of killing 4 people in cold blood and was placed on death row. However, while on death row, Tookie underwent a transformation. He wrote several books for elementary school-age children in the series Tookie Speaks Out Against Gang Violence. He also wrote the following. "So today I apologize to you all the children of America and South Africa who must cope every day with dangerous street gangs. I no longer participate in the so-called gangster lifestyle, and I deeply regret that I ever did. My goal is to reach as many young minds as possible to warn you about the perils of a gang lifestyle. I am no longer part of the problem. Thanks to the Almighty. I am no longer sleepwalking through life. I pray that one day my apology will be accepted." The rap star Snoop Dogg has said that Tookie became an inspiration to him and many others. What do you think? Is the Stanley Tookie Williams who writes children's books and campaigns for peace and forgiveness the same person as the one who killed 4 people in cold blood 30 years ago? Was the state of California justified in executing Tookie on 13 December 2005 for crimes a younger Tookie committed in 1979? Food for thought. Practice your sensitivity toward the ambiguity in the word same by determining whether the word is used in the following sentences to refer to qualitative identity or numerical identity. 1. Jane is the same age as Roberto. 2. Anakin Skywalker is the same as Darth Vader. 3. The evening star and the morning star are the same. 4. The person who was Secretary of Defense in 1990 is the same man who was Vice President in 2005. 5. I think this is the same policeman who pulled over my sister yesterday. 6. Why do I always get the same grade in all my classes? 7. You have the same haircut as Christina Aguilera. 8. Peter is not the same anymore. Food for thought. To clarify your initial reactions to the problem of personal identity, answer the following questions with true or false. 1. If, after a serious accident, a person suffers from complete amnesia, he has lost his sense of self and effectively starts a new life. 2. Even if we can't remember doing something, we are still responsible for what we have done. 3. If someone undergoes a successful sex change operation, he or she does not remain the same person. 4. It is logically possible to survive one's death and continue life in a new spiritual body in heaven. 5. We change from moment to moment and become a new person every day. 6. It is logically possible that conversion to a new religion turns someone into a new person. 7. If a person has a severe case of Alzheimer's disease, she is not the same person as she used to be. 8. What makes someone a person is not the body but rather than soul. 9. If after a serious car accident that destroyed my body, a surgeon transplanted my brain, and hence my consciousness, into a new body, I would have survived the accident although my body would not have. The illusion theory. 5. To analyze the advantages and limitations of the illusion theory of personal identity. The case for the illusion theory. The illusion theory of personal identity takes its starting point from the observation that we all undergo a continuous qualitative change. From minute to minute, our bodies are constantly gaining and losing physical material. According to recent biological studies, a human organism changes its entire physical makeup every 7 years, which means that 7 years from now, all of the current molecules and atoms in your body will have been replaced by new ones. We have already seen that many thinkers want to insist that there is something permanent behind this process, but why do we have to make this assumption? If we are good empiricists and trust our senses, we can observe only change, but not a permanent self. Thus, the empirical evidence points to the possibility that there is no permanent and unchanging self. If we adopt this position, we embrace the illusion theory of personal identity, which claims that a permanent self is merely an illusion. The idea that everything in the universe, including ourselves, undergoes permanent change has been around for a long time. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, ca. 535 to 475 BCE, was the first to embrace it unconditionally. He wrote in a well-known fragment, "It is not possible to step twice into the same river. It scatters and again comes together, and approaches and recedes." If Heraclitus is right and everything changes, then it is indeed tempting to think about ourselves in terms of a river. Although we call one river at different points by the same name, it is not possible to point to anything permanent that actually is the river. The water in the river changes constantly, and even the river banks undergo a constant transformation. If the illusion theory is correct, we should think about ourselves as something that undergoes constant change as well. The American philosopher William James agreed with the view that we experience our personal selves as a constantly changing river. Thoughts connected as we feel them to be connected are what we mean by personal selves. Our consciousness is in constant change. I do not mean by this to say that no one state of mind has any duration, even if true. That would be hard to establish. What I wish to lay stress on is this, that no state once gone can recur and be identical with what it was before. Often, we are ourselves struck at the strange differences in our successive views of the same thing. We wonder how we ever could have opined as we did last month about a certain matter. We have outgrown the possibility of that state of mind, we know riot how. From one year to another, we see things in new lights. What was unreal has grown real, and what was exciting is insipid. The friends we used to care the world for are shrunken to shadows, the women once so divine, the stars, the woods, and the waters, how now so dull and common. Consciousness flows. A river or stream is the metaphor by which it is most naturally described. James's observation that our consciousness undergoes permanent change appears credible. It follows then that not only our bodies undergo continuous change, but our minds as well. In light of this, it seems plausible to conclude that the idea of a permanent self that persists through time is indeed only a convenient illusion. Asian religions also support the view that there is no permanent self. Like Heraclitus, the Chinese Taoist thinker Zhuangzi, ca. 4th century BCE, believed there are no permanent conditions of any kind. Zhuangzi compared time and change to a horse that runs on and on. Taoists believe that, owing to this situation, it is futile to make plans instead. We should live instinctively according to the principle of WWEI, having no deliberate actions. Likewise, Buddhists argue that the main source of suffering is our perpetual dissatisfaction with our condition. In hopes of finding happiness, we desire to gain what we do not have and form aversions toward the things we do have. However, according to the Buddha, these attempts to satisfy the individual self only perpetuate suffering. If we believe that we exist in the present as well as in the future, then it is easy to be afraid that things will turn out badly for us. We consequently make preparations for the future and direct our attention away from the present. In doing this, we spend all our energy planning and plotting for future success, and we forget that we need to pay attention to what is happening right now. This pattern quickly leads to greed, regret, and ultimately suffering. For Buddhists, there is no self. They call the belief in a permanently abiding self-ignorance. Problems for the illusion theory. Even as there are a number of reasons that make the illusion theory of personal identity attractive, there are also some obvious difficulties. If we agree that there is no permanent self, then strictly speaking, we will not be around tomorrow or 10 years from now. From a pragmatic point of view, this is clearly significant. There are many things that I do today only because of my belief that I will enjoy the benefits of these actions later. For example, a good portion of my monthly paycheck flows into a retirement account. If the illusion theory of personal identity is correct, I should seriously rethink the wisdom of that practice. If there is no permanent self, the person who will live comfortably on my retirement savings is not identical to the person I am today. So, the illusion theory of personal identity makes it look rational to spend most, if not all, of my money in the present. However, this does not fit well with my natural inclinations. I do care about what happens in the future, and I strongly believe and hope that the person who will live on my retirement savings is identical to the person I am today. Of course, you may not be bothered by the idea that your self does not persist through time. We have seen that Buddhists think that a life focused on the moment rather than on the future is a good life. Nonetheless, things become a bit more complicated once we think not only about our own selves but also about our relationships with other people. Our lives become meaningful as we love and care for others. For example, I have a strong relationship with my parents. When I think about the love I feel for my mother, I do think that the person who reared me is the same person who now, 40 years later, calls me and takes an interest in my life. I take comfort in the fact that my mother is the same person now as the person who walked with me on my first day of school. If the illusion theory is true, I would have to understand my love for other people in a different way. I would have to conclude that my mother today is closely related to the person who brought me up, but, strictly speaking, that person is not around anymore. This conclusion seems problematic. My attachment to and love for others seems to presuppose that these other people persist through time, and this provides a good reason to look for an alternative to the illusion theory. The illusion theory also has a hard time explaining why we punish people for crimes they have committed in the distant past. Suppose that Carl robbed a bank 10 years ago and managed to elude the authorities until last Monday when he was finally captured. It seems fair and just to punish Karl for what he did 10 years ago, and few people would object to this practice. However, inflicting a punishment on Karl now is incompatible with the illusion theory of personal identity. If that theory is correct, we should conclude that we would be punishing an innocent person, for the Karl who robbed the bank 10 years ago is not around anymore and is certainly not identical to the Karl who was captured last Monday. These objections to the identity theory rest on pragmatic concerns. They show that we live our lives in the firm belief that we are going to be around in the future, and also that it is just to punish people for what they did in the past. The objections do not show that the illusion theory is inconsistent. Thus, if we believe in the illusion theory strongly enough, we might start to change our lives accordingly and eliminate the pragmatic concerns. We might start living more in the moment and stop worrying about the future. We might also stop blaming people for what they did in the past and thereby eliminate a good deal of resentment and hate. However, if you are like me and have a strong attachment to the belief that we persist through time, then it seems desirable to look for alternatives to the illusion theory of personal identity. Food for thought. The philosopher David Hume was the first empiricist to draw attention to the fact that we cannot observe any permanent self. He wrote in his A Treatise of Human Nature, "For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other, of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I can never catch myself at any time without perception, and can never observe anything but the perception. The mind is a kind of theatre, where several perceptions successively make their appearance, pass, repass, glide away, and mingle in an infinite variety of postures and situations. There is properly no simplicity in it at any one time, nor identity indifferent, whatever natural propensity we may have to imagine that simplicity and identity." Do you agree with Hume's observations that it is not possible myself at any time without perception, and can to discover a permanent self when we analyze and reflect on and never observe anything but the perception of what is happening in our minds? Food for thought. In the Diamond Sutra, one of the best-known Buddhist scriptures, the Buddha explains to his disciple Subhuti that individuals who are becoming enlightened, bodhisattva, do not believe in a self. They also do not believe that the phenomenal world is ultimately real. The Buddha says this: "O Subhuti, there does not exist in those noble-minded bodhisattva the idea of self, there does not exist the idea of a being, the idea of a living being, the idea of a person. Nor does there exist, O Subhuti, for these noble-minded bodhisattva the idea of quality, dharma, nor of no quality. Neither does there exist, O Subhuti, an idea or no idea. And why? Because, O Subhuti, if there existed for these noble-minded bodhisattva the idea of quality, then they would believe in a self, they would believe in a being, they would believe in a living being, they would believe in a person. And if there existed for them the idea of no quality, even then they would believe in a living being, they would believe in a person. And why? Because, O Subhuti, neither quality nor no quality is to be accepted by a noble-minded bodhisattva. Therefore, this hidden saying has been preached by the Tathagat, i.e., the Buddha, by those who know the teaching of the law, as like unto a raft, all qualities indeed must be abandoned, much more no qualities." Do you agree with this perspective on personal identity? Explain why or why not. Food for thought. In 2017, after having spent nearly 40 years in prison, Craig Coley was pardoned by California Governor Jerry Brown. DNA tests had finally shown that he could not have committed the murders of his girlfriend Rhonda Wicht and her 4-year-old son in 1978. In order to compensate Craig Coley for having spent 39 years in jail as an innocent man, Hess was awarded $2.1 million in a settlement with the city of Simi Valley. Craig Coley is clearly morally entitled to receive this settlement. However, does this not presuppose that Craig Coley is the same as the person who was jailed in 1978? How would a supporter of the illusion theory respond to this case? The body theory, or animalism. 5.3 Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the body theory. The case for the body theory. Suppose that 20 years ago Charlita, your very best friend, vanished on an ocean cruise in the South Pacific. The ship she was on sunk in a storm, and nobody has since heard from Charlita or anybody else who was aboard that ship. Suppose further that a person now rings your doorbell and claims to be Charlita, alleging that she managed to swim to a hidden island and lived there all these years. You are not sure whether to believe this story. After all, the person looks nothing like the Charlita you remember. What would you do to find out whether the person at your door is identical to your best friend? Doesn't it seem tempting to do a DNA test or to take fingerprints? If this person has the same fingerprints as your lost friend, then it seems to follow that she is indeed Charlita. If you agree with this process, you are in effect embracing the principle of the same body same person, and you are thus subscribing to the body theory of personal identity. According to this theory, we are identical to our biological bodies, and we persist through time as long as our bodies retain functional organization. That is, we are identical to our living bodies. If I should be run over by a truck, then I am not around anymore, although something that resembles my living body still is, namely, my corpse. For this reason, the body theory is often referred to as animalism. The identity conditions for humans are in principle the same as for all other animals, that is, we are around as long as our biological living bodies are around. It is important not to misunderstand the principle of the same body same self. By sameness here we do not mean qualitative sameness, but numerical sameness. Our living bodies change considerably throughout our lives. It is even possible that we might lose a hand or a foot in an accident. However, such change does not mean that we would have become a different person, since we are numerically still dealing with the same physical body. One of the strongest arguments in defense of the body theory is connected with situations in which people fall into a persistent vegetative state. Suppose, for example, that you visit your Uncle Steve in the hospital. The night before your visit he had temporary heart failure, which deprived his brain of oxygen for an extended period of time and severely damaged it. He is still able to breathe, and his heart is still pumping, but your Uncle Steve will never regain consciousness. He has lost all higher brain function forever. Has your Uncle Steve gone out of existence? It seems wrong to say that he is dead. After all, he is still breathing, and his heart is still pumping. If you think that your uncle is still around, even though he has fallen into a permanent vegetative state, then you have reason to subscribe to the body theory of personal identity. According to that theory, Uncle Steve is around as long as his body is alive. It doesn't matter that his brain has been damaged. Problems for the body theory. The story about Uncle Steve can also be used as a reason to criticize the body theory. When some people hear the story about him, they think that the body theory comes to the wrong conclusion. Although Uncle Steve's body is alive, it is wrong to think that Uncle Steve the person has survived the brain damage. Because they think that a person must be able to think and reason, they reject the body theory. Another reason to object to this theory relates to the prospect of life after death. Even if someone does not believe that life after death is plausible, it seems logically possible that we continue to exist after our physical bodies stop functioning. It is possible, after all, to make a movie about a continued existence after physical death. However, the body theory runs into fundamental difficulties when it comes to explaining this possibility. First, according to most religions that speak of life after death, people will not have the same kind of body in the afterlife that they have had on earth. Many religions introduce the idea of a spiritual body, but according to the body theory, a person would not persist through the change from a physical body to a spiritual body. In other words, if I exist only as long as I have the numerically same body as I have on earth, and if my new spiritual body is numerically distinct from my physical body, then I do not remain the same person. Theorists can avoid this difficulty by insisting that God will recreate the same physical body that existed on earth, but it is not clear whether that body will be in the same state as it was right before death. If it is, life in heaven might not be very pleasurable, since old bodies are often the source of major discomfort. On the other hand, if God recreates physical bodies in the state in which they were at a younger age, then the question arises as to whether the bodies will start to age again. If my resurrected body is physically identical to my body on earth, it is a matter of causal necessity that it will age again. But that conclusion is incompatible with the idea that eternal life in heaven would be enjoyable. Thus, no matter how we twist the story, it seems as if the body theory of personal identity is not compatible with the idea that life after death is logically possible. Some people might take this as a reason to claim that life after death is logically incoherent, but most people will probably want to search for a different theory of personal identity. In addition to the issue of life after death, there is another closely related problem for the body theory. The philosopher John Locke pointed out that it seems logically possible for two different persons to switch their bodies. Such body switches have been the subject of stories and fairy tales and have also provided the theme for Hollywood movies. The movie Freaky Friday, for instance, deals with the complications that arise when a daughter switches bodies with her mother. Given that we can make movies about this situation, it seems plausible to conclude that body switches are logically possible. However, according to the body theory of personal identity, body switches should be logically impossible, not a very convincing conclusion. A final weakness of the body theory has to do with cases of total amnesia. It seems reasonable to say that individuals who suffer from complete amnesia have lost their sense of self and are no longer the same persons. This conclusion indicates that our sense of personal identity is dependent on psychological continuity. However, according to the body theory, a person who suffers from complete amnesia is still the same person as long as he or she has the numerically same body. This might strike many people as rather unorthodox thinking. Food for thought. Imagine the following scenario: Jennifer, a 30-year-old, blonde, Caucasian mother of a son named Jacob, has been in a serious car accident. Her body is seriously injured, and the doctors in the hospital are unable to keep her alive for more than a few hours. However, when Jennifer dies, the doctors are able to remove her uninjured brain from her skull and transplant the brain into the healthy body of a 22-year-old African-American woman who has died from a brain tumor. The operation was a success. What would you tell Jacob in this situation? Would you tell him that his mother has survived the accident and is still alive? Food for thought. Although the principle that our personal identity is preserved as long as we inhabit the numerically same body is plausible and well established, it seems questionable at times. Consider the situation of Robert, who used to be a very athletic person, spending all of his free time playing basketball and riding motorcycles. In August 2002, Robert crashed his motorcycle and is now paraplegic. Although he still has the same numerical body as before, he feels that he is not the same person since he cannot do the things he loves most. Do you agree with him? If yes, what consequences does this have for the body theory of personal identity? The soul theory. 5.4 Summarize the challenges presented by the soul theory of personal identity. The case for the soul theory. The soul theory of personal identity follows a similar philosophical strategy to that of the body theory. Both theories attempt to tie a personal identity to an enduring entity. The body theory focuses on the physical living body. The soul theory is centered on the idea of a non-physical soul. The key principle of the soul theory is the same soul, same person. The great advantage of the soul theory over the body theory is that it can easily explain how life after death is logically possible. According to the soul theory, our personal identity is not affected by the death of our physical bodies. When the heart stops beating and the brain stops functioning, the non-physical soul simply continues to exist and allows us to continue on. The soul theory is firmly grounded in popular culture. Singers and songwriters frequently talk about the soul as the center of the self. Religious texts support these sentiments as well by using the concepts soul and self interchangeably. It is therefore no surprise that many people feel very comfortable embracing the soul theory of personal identity. Unfortunately, this theory also leads to some serious philosophical difficulties. Problems for the soul theory. Good philosophical theories should not only appear plausible, but they also need to help us explain the world. The soul theory of personal identity seems plausible to many people, but it runs into difficulties when it comes to offering explanations for our beliefs and our judgments about personal identity. Consider an example from college life. Suppose you are enrolled in a Monday, Wednesday, Friday philosophy class. Your teacher is a brown-haired, fairly tall woman with a British accent. It is the second class meeting of the semester, and the student who sits next to you and who missed the first class session asks, "Is she the same person who taught this class on Monday?" You answer, "Yes, she is." Now suppose the student does not quite trust you and continues, "Do you know this for sure?" You answer, "Yes, she has the same accent, the same brown hair, and the same height. She is the same person." Notice that in justifying your knowledge, you made reference to the person's body. If you were a firm believer in the soul theory, you would have responded to the second question of your classmate with something like this: "Well, I am not entirely sure whether that is the same person who taught the class on Monday. I am not able to check whether she has the same soul as the person on Monday." That second answer seems peculiar. Most of us would feel very confident in asserting that we do indeed know that the teacher was the same as on Monday. But it is hard to see how a supporter of the soul theory could ever justify such a judgment. Thus, the soul theory of personal identity leads to a form of skepticism. We can never be sure whether we are dealing with the same person because we have no means of checking whether the person continues to have the same soul. Souls are, after all, invisible, non-physical substances that cannot be seen, heard, or tasted. The skepticism would even extend to judgments about our own selves. By what means can I verify that I have the same soul as yesterday? Perhaps my soul has disintegrated, or it has multiplied. There seems to be no way of making sure that such change has not occurred. If we want to avoid such pervasive skepticism about personal identity, we need to look for an alternative to the soul theory. The English philosopher John Locke, 1632 to 1704, raised another worry about the soul theory. In the chapter of identity and diversity in his an essay concerning human understanding, Locke writes, "For if the identity of soul alone makes the same man, and there be nothing in the nature of matter, why the same individual spirit may not be united to different bodies, it will be possible that those men, living in distant ages, may have been the same man. Loke points out that if our identity consists merely in having the same soul, then it is entirely possible that people living today are identical to people in the distant past. If the soul I have today was attached previously to the body of Julius Caesar, then it would follow that I and Julius Caesar are the very same person. Loke thinks that this is a paradoxical consequence of accepting the soul theory and that the theory ought to be abandoned. In addition, the soul theory is confronted with some serious metaphysical challenges, which are normally discussed in the context of the mind-body problem. We will discuss these questions in the next chapter. Identity as psychological connection between life stages. The body theory and the soul theory attempt to provide an account of personal identity that assumes our personal selves are substances. The body theory claims that we are physical substances, and the soul theory claims that we are immaterial, non-physical substances. Since both theories run into problems, it is tempting to look for alternative accounts of personal identity. A promising alternative is to explain personal identity in terms of a psychological connection between different life stages. There are different ways to explain the nature of this psychological connection. One way is to focus on our memories as a bridge between different life stages. A second one is to focus on stories, narratives. Let us begin with memories. Food for thought. The soul theory has been around for a long time. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato was one of the first thinkers to develop the soul theory in greater detail. Plato believed in reincarnation. He thought that a soul which was human in one life might be reborn an animal in the next. Does this idea that the very same soul might be reincarnated in radically different bodies make sense to you? Food for thought. The soul theory also leads to certain theological difficulties. If the soul theory is correct and our self consists of an immaterial, non-physical substance, then we actually never die. What happens at death is simply the separation of the soul from the body. Thus, we never really vanish but continue to exist. The theological difficulty with this view is its effect on the concept of resurrection. If we never die, it is not quite clear why we need to be resurrected. However, many religions adhere to the idea of resurrection. Can you think of a way in which we can make the soul theory of personal identity compatible with the idea of resurrection? The memory theory of personal identity. 5.5 Explain the strengths and weaknesses of Loke's memory theory. The English philosopher John Locke, 1632–1704, was the first to explore the memory theory of personal identity in greater detail. In his essay concerning human understanding, Locke writes, "For since consciousness always accompanies thinking, and 'tis that makes everyone to be what he can self, and thereby distinguishes himself from all other thinking things, in this alone consists personal identity, i.e., the sameness of a rational being. And as far as this consciousness can be extended backwards to any past action or thought, so far reaches the identity of that person." The basic idea behind the memory theory of personal identity is the following: I am identical to a person who existed in the past as long as I can remember at least some events that were experienced by that person. Right now, for example, I can remember what it felt like to receive a failing grade on a Latin examination in 8th grade. If I can remember this experience, it is clear that I am the person who received a failing grade in 8th grade. Nobody else can possibly remember what it felt like to fail that Latin exam. Myself, therefore, extends back as far as I can remember past experiences. Thus, we are connected with the past as long as the past is somehow present within us, and we will be connected with our present in the future, as long as we are able to remember this present. The case for the memory theory. The memory theory can solve many problems that undermine the body and the soul theories of personal identity. First, according to the memory theory, it is logically possible to survive one's death. For example, if after my death a person in heaven can remember what I did on this earth, it seems plausible to conclude that this person is identical to the person I am today. It is of no consequence whether that person has a spiritual body or is simply a non-physical soul that exists in a different sphere. As long as my memories are around, myself am around. Moreover, unlike the soul theory, the memory theory can explain how we can know that the person we see today is the same person we knew in the past. If we are in doubt, we can simply ask the person about various past life experiences. Consider the example of a 20-year class reunion. Suppose you see a person who looks somewhat like your old buddy Marissa. However, you are not quite sure whether she is indeed your old buddy according to the memory theory. All you need to do is start a conversation and ask that person a couple of questions about the past. If the person can remember some of the adventures you and Marissa survived together, you have good reason to think that the person is indeed the same Marissa, no matter what she looks like. There are also other reasons that support the memory theory. The German philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, 1646 to 1716, suggested the following thought experiment. Suppose that you are offered the chance to become the king or queen of China, a person with unlimited wealth and every opportunity to fulfill all desires, on the condition that you undergo a brainwashing that will destroy every memory you currently have. Would you accept that offer? Most of us, I suppose, would decline. What good is it to become rich and powerful if we have to sacrifice our memories? Our sense of self seems essentially connected with our ability to remember our past. A person who does not know any of my past experiences does not seem to be me, even if the person has the same body I currently have. Problems for the memory theory. Although the memory theory is compatible with common sense and is able to solve many of the difficulties that plague the body theory and the soul theory, it leads to some difficulties as well. The Scottish philosopher Thomas Reid, 1710 to 1796, pointed out that the memory theory can lead to potential inconsistencies. Reid imagined the following scenario. Suppose that an old retired general, G, still has vivid memories of his experiences as a middle-aged officer, M, but has completely forgotten everything about his childhood, Y. Suppose further that when he was a middle-aged officer, me, the general still had a very detailed recollection of his childhood, Y. The logical problem that arises in this situation is the following. Since M can remember his life as a young boy Y, we have to conclude that M is identical to Y. And since G can remember his life as a middle-aged officer M, we also need to conclude that G is identical to M. However, since the old General G has absolutely no recollection of his life as a young boy, we need to hold that G is not identical to Y. Thus, the memory theory seems to lead to a set of inconsistent propositions. 1. M is equal to Y. 2. G is equal to M. 3. G is not equal to Y. Any philosophical theory that leads to inconsistencies is in serious trouble. We can take this as a reason to abandon the memory theory completely, or we can try to modify the theory such that the inconsistency can be avoided. In reality, a small modification of the theory will correct the problem. All we need to do is to distinguish between direct and indirect memories. A direct memory is one that can be recalled consciously right at this very moment. For example, I have a direct memory of what I ate for breakfast this morning. However, I have no direct memory of what shirt I was wearing 10 days ago. When I try to think about it, I simply draw a blank. Indirect memories are those that I cannot recall directly, but that a former version of myself was able to recall directly. For instance, I cannot directly remember the name of my first English teacher in high school, but there was a time in my life when I was able to recall this easily, and I am linked to that time by direct memories that I can recall right now. This distinction between direct and indirect memories puts us in a position to solve the difficulty that was raised by Thomas Reid. Although the old general cannot directly recall his experiences as a boy, he has an indirect memory of these events, since a former version of him, the middle-aged officer, was able to recall these experiences directly. Thus, if we modify the memory theory so that being the same self requires only that we have an indirect memory linked to the past, we can successfully avoid the prior inconsistency. This modification of the memory theory also helps us to deal with cases of Alzheimer's disease. Consider the following situation. Suppose that one of your close relatives has an advanced case of Alzheimer's. You visit her in the nursing home at the beginning of the week and have a great conversation. A couple of days later, during your next visit, the condition of your relative has deteriorated. When you enter her room, she greets you with the words, "Who in the world are you?" In this situation, it would be odd to say that your relative is no longer the same self as she was several days earlier, although the original memory theory would have led to this conclusion. Stating the memory theory in terms of indirect memories resolves this problem. In this case, we can argue that your relative probably has some direct memories that link her to the person you visited several days ago, when she could still directly remember who you were. We are therefore able to conclude that your relative is still identical to the person who remembered you several days ago. A more serious challenge to the memory theory is raised by the problem of false memories. It is well known that memories can be deceiving. I seem to remember, for instance, that as a 3-year-old child, I got lost in a crowded shopping mall for several hours. However, I am not quite sure whether this is really a genuine memory or simply something I seem to remember because my mother told me about the incident later in my life. Let us call memories that are not caused by actual experiences false memories. It is obvious that false memories can lead to a false sense of self. Suppose that I seem to remember the experiences of Napoleon. I am clearly not justified to claim on the basis of these memories that I am identical to Napoleon unless I can be sure that these memories are genuine and true. Similar problems appear when people seem to remember, often under hypnosis, certain dramatic events from their early childhood. Thus, in order to provide an accurate account of personal identity on the basis of memories, we need to distinguish between false and genuine memories. We might draw this distinction by defining a genuine memory as a memory of an experience that in fact happened to me. Although this definition seems natural, it creates a serious logical problem. The memory theory explains personal identity in terms of genuine memories. If we now define genuine memories as memories of experiences that in fact happened to me, we are involved in a vicious circle. For in this case, we define the self in terms of genuine memories, and then when pressed on what constitutes genuine memories, we turn around and define genuine memories as memories that were caused by events that really happened to me. This is a vicious circularity and is, therefore, logically unacceptable. To avoid the circularity objection, the Australian philosopher Sydney Shoemaker introduced the concept of a quasi-memory, which is an experience. 1. That we seem to remember. 2. That somebody actually had. 3. That is caused by an actual experience. It is not important to understand this rather technical concept. Precisely what is important is to understand that this concept of a quasi-memory allows us to state the memory theory of personal identity without presupposing that we already understand the concept of self. We can say now that a person at time t1 is identical to a person at time t2 only if the person at time t2 quasi remembers the experiences of the person at time t1. The concept of a quasi-memory has some drawbacks, however. Take a look at the third condition of the definition. We quasi-remember something only if it is caused by actual experiences. This condition makes sure that mere illusions and false memories do not count as quasi-memories. However, the condition raises an epistemic problem. How can we know that condition 3 applies to our memories? We obviously cannot know this directly. The philosopher John Parry has concluded that causal memory theories can successfully avoid the charge that they offer a circular account of personal identity, but they do so at the cost of making the self an inferred entity. This is not an entirely satisfactory result. A final and more pressing difficulty for the memory theories concerns so-called reduplication or branching cases. Imagine for a moment that a machine can create a molecule-by-molecule copy of you. Although such a machine is not yet causally possible, the machine is certainly logically possible, and in the near future, such a machine might even be causally possible. In such a situation, your molecule-by-molecule copy has the same memory connection with your past as you do. It remembers playing with your siblings and being raised by your parents. If we want to maintain that the copy is only a copy and is not identical to you, we would have to appeal to the body. The memory theory alone is not in a good position to deal with reduplication problems. The British philosopher Derek Parfit, 1940 to 2017, has taken reduplication problems as a reason to question the importance of identity. Parfit points out that in reduplication cases it does not seem to matter with whom we are identical. Imagine, for example, that right after you are copied by the reduplication machine, an explosion kills your original body but leaves your copy intact. In this case, it would be wrong to say that you have been killed since somebody who has your body and all your memories is still around. You would have survived even if the survivor is not, strictly speaking, identical to you. Parfit argues that what we should care about is survival and not identity. In light of the fact that the memory theory leads to several problems, let us explore an alternative view of personal identity that focuses on stories rather than memories as a bridge between life stages. Food for thought. Decide whether you have direct or indirect memories of the following events in your life. 1. Your 16th birthday. 2. The name of your best friend in 4th grade. 3. The name of the lead singer in your first favorite music group. 4. Your 10th birthday. 5. The title of the first book you ever read. 6. The name of your favorite elementary school teacher. Food for thought. The problem of false memories is especially pressing when people seem to remember experiences from past lives. Take a look at the following experience that was anonymously described on a web page with the title Practical Guide to Past Life Memories. My husband and I went on a campaign trip last summer. We had never done anything like it before, and I found it hard to fall asleep outdoors under the stars. It was beautiful lying there in my husband's arms, but once he fell asleep, I had lie there for hours, half expecting an attack at any moment. 3 days into the vacation, I managed to fall asleep in the middle of the night and dreamt that I was a young American Indian boy lost in the same area we were camping in. I could feel the young boy's nervousness and fear as he struggled to find food and make his way home. He lay on the ground at night, just as I was doing, and he wasn't able to sleep either as he was aware of every sound and movement. He seemed to think he was being followed or pursued, and all day long he kept looking behind him. He did this day after day. Eventually, it all got to be too much for him and he began to run. He caught his foot in the root of a tree and fell, breaking a leg. He couldn't move, and he lay on the ground waiting for death. When I woke up, I was sweating and my heart was racing. I'm convinced that I was that boy. It was far too vivid and real to be a dream. Would this person be justified to believe that she is the same person as the young American Indian boy? Food for thought. Scott Abraham wrote in MEN magazine. 28 years after I was raped. Though I retained memories of some of the less damning incidents, I repressed most of the horror. The scenes, feelings, and actions were far too agonizing for a little child to bear. I had no witnesses to corroborate my story, no pictures, no medical records. My mother had terrified me with literal torture in the privacy of my family home. In a brilliant adaptation to unbearable pain, I disassociated myself from the memory, and for all that time, I could not consciously hold the whole of the reality in my mind. For years was a drug addict, an alcoholic, a sexually compulsive womanizer, and a violent misanthrope. Like hundreds of thousands of others like me, it was not until I found sobriety that the barriers to memory began to crumble. I joined abuse recovery groups and found a healing community of peers who supported my healing and believed my memories. Scott Abraham's story is not rare. Every year, hundreds of adults seem to recall repressed memories of childhood abuse. Some of these recovered memories are true, but many have been proven to be bogus. How do we tell the difference? Food for thought. The philosopher Bernard Williams suggested the following thought experiment as an objection to the memory theory. Suppose someone informs you that at a future time t, you will be tortured. Upon hearing this, you are scared and fearful. But then you are told that prior to t, all your memories will be erased as well. Will this alleviate your fears? Williams argues that this additional information will do nothing to quell your fears of torture. Do you agree with Williams? If yes, what theory of personal identity is supported by this answer? Narrative conception of personal identity. 5.6 Understand the key features of the narrative conception of personal identity. Imagine that you are on a first date with somebody. Your date looks at you and asks, "Tell me something which helps me understand who you are." How would you respond? It seems natural that you might answer along the following lines. Well, I was born into a middle-class family. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old, and when I turned 8, I moved with my mother and my stepfather to the suburbs of Chicago. What you are doing here is explaining who you are by telling a story, narrative, about your life. Stories are powerful tools that connect past, present, and future into a coherent whole. The neurologist Oliver Sacks writes in this context, each of us constructs and lives a narrative, and this narrative is us, our identities. Autobiographical narratives seem to go to the center of our inner selves, and they are also of help when confronting the question of whether and how we persist through time. In virtue of what are certain past experiences or past actions connected with me? One possibility is that my past experiences can be incorporated into the story, narrative, of my life. Myself, therefore, consists of a set of experiences, which are unified into one larger story of my life. The story as a whole gives my life coherence and meaning it would otherwise lack. This narrative conception of identity accommodates the fact that our sense of self involves something more than just a sequential list of events. It also involves an explanation of how events in one's past led to subsequent events. The narrative conception of personal identity stresses that the core of our identity is provided by the self-interpreting and self-creating activity of telling stories. Advantages of the narrative view. The narrative view of personal identity has several advantages. First, this conception of personal identity connects the metaphysical question of how persons persist through time to the ethical question of what really matters to us. If we accept the narrative conception of self, then we cannot answer the question of how we persist through time without clarifying why certain beliefs, values, and experiences fit into a coherent story that reaches out into the past and the future. The narrative conception of personal identity, therefore, explains our practical concerns for our future selves much better than any competing conception. Second, we have seen that the memory theory of personal identity was challenged by the possibility of false memories. False memories might lead to a false sense of self. At first glance, the narrative account is confronted by the same problem. Would it not be possible to unite my life experiences into a fake story of my life and thus create a false sense of self? Clearly, this is a possibility. However, the American philosopher Maria Sketchman, born 1960, has suggested in this context that personal narratives must be subject to a reality constraint, that is, the self-narrative must cohere with basic observational facts about the world and must exhibit a fundamental grasp of what the world is like. In this way, it is possible to eliminate the possibility that we unify our life experiences via false and fake stories. Third, the narrative account of personal identity can also explain the possibility of how we might survive the death of our physical bodies. It is fairly easy to imagine that our autobiographic narrative can involve experiences, actions and events that happen after the death of our physical bodies. In that way, the narrative view can accommodate the possibility that our selves remain the same in a possible afterlife. So, for those of us who subscribe to the idea that an afterlife should at the very minimum be logically possible, the narrative view is an attractive theory of personal identity. Problems for the narrative view. Unfortunately, the narrative conception of personal identity also leads to problems and challenges. Let us highlight some of them. First, we have seen that the narrative conception of personal identity defines our identity in terms of a life story that connects our life experiences, desires, and actions over time. Surely, there are many who have these kinds of life stories readily available in their mind, but what should we say about those of us who do not have such an overarching story to tell? Should we say that people who have no overarching life stories are people who have no identity across time? That is obviously not a promising result. Defenders of the narrative view often respond to this difficulty by introducing the idea of a hypothetical life story. This means that we do not have to have a story available in our minds, but that if we were asked appropriate questions, we would be able to respond by producing a story. The basic idea here is this: suppose you meet somebody and ask her about her life story. She responds by saying that there is nothing to tell, there is no story. In this case, you could start asking different and more basic questions. Where were you born? How did you get here? Where did you go to school? What do you hope to do tomorrow? By asking these simpler questions, one can slowly piece together a larger, coherent life story even if the subject of the story is unwilling or unable to tell the larger story. The claim then is that all of us carry with us such a hypothetical life story, and that such a hypothetical life story provides the foundation for our personal identity across time. However, the idea of hypothetical life stories leads to new problems. Imagine that you ask a person some basic questions about their biography, their intentions, feelings, and hopes. The person responds to each question. What guarantee do we have that all these responses fit together into a single, overarching story of the person's life? Is it not possible that the person tells us many small, disconnected stories about their life that do not form a coherent whole? The British philosopher Galen Strawson, born 1952, has called people who do not experience their inner selves in a diachronic and narrative way as episodics. Episodics are people who do not have a strong sense that their present self was present in the distant past or will be present in the future. The possibility of living with an episodic self shows that it is mistaken to make a narrative self a necessary condition for having a self at all. It follows therefore that a self can endure across time even if no overarching narrative or a hypothetical narrative can be constructed. Personal narratives might be nothing more than an epiphenomenon that supervenes on top of a diachronic identity that has nothing to do with narratives. Final remarks on personal identity. 5.7 Recognize the relationship of questions about personal identity with other philosophical topics. The deeper we think about the persistence question, the more it becomes clear that none of the theories we have discussed can put all our worries to rest. At the end of the day, reflections on personal identity lead to more questions than answers. However, this result can be very useful. We have seen that the persistence question is connected to a number of important cases in applied ethics. When we have to decide whether to pull the plug on a machine keeping a loved one alive, the question of whether this loved one is identical to a living body is obviously crucial. The inconclusive result of our discussion indicates that we should approach these decisions with some care. Nobody can claim that end-of-life issues, or for that matter beginning-of-life issues, are clear-cut and trivial. If our discussion makes us more thoughtful when we approach these decisions, it has been useful. Moreover, our discussion has shown that the nature of our own self is mysterious. It is far from clear when the person who I am right now came into this world or when the person I am will cease to exist. This mystery is intellectually stimulating and entices us to explore our true nature more fully. Study and reflection questions. 1. The problem of personal identity is connected to a wide set of different questions. What specific question that is connected to personal identity do you find most interesting? Explain why. 2. Suppose that sometime in the future a crazy scientist creates a perfect clone of you. The clone has a qualitatively identical body to yours and has the same memories as you have as well as the same voice, character, and so on. How would you convince a court of law that the clone is not really you? What theory of personal identity would help you to make your case? 3. The person you are right now grew and developed out of a fetus in your mother's womb. Should we say that you are identical to that fetus? Explain why different theories of personal identity answer this question in different ways. Explain what answer you find most compelling. 4. Suppose you are in a serious accident and end up in a vegetative state. Would you want your family to pull the plug? Defend your answer with the help of theories of personal identity. 5. Christianity is essentially linked to the notion of resurrection. Is it possible to make sense of resurrection, or is any account of resurrection flawed?